In this video, I want to help you understand how the modern workplace attacks men in many ways and how to protect yourself, right? So I'm going to give you some expert advice. I've worked in the finance industry for over a decade. I'm sure many of you are familiar with my intro, so I won't go through that. But I want to talk about Mike Pence to start off with. Now, who was Mike Pence? He was the vice president during Trump's first presidency in 2016. So he has a rule, right, which is not eating alone with women, which might sound a bit weird, but typically when you're in political environments, there's many late nights where you're working and you're having all your meetings with diplomats and other business contacts and helping develop, the state of America. Now, this will involve many work dinners, and he would always invite his wife to have work dinners with himself. And this would avoid the instances of him being falsely accused in the future. And I don't know whether he deliberately did that, but that was just his habit, right? And then all of a sudden, all these type of Democrats, left-leaning personalities were quite critical of that. Right, so it goes through in a bit of detail here in this Guardian article. But so what he did, it gets described as the Pence's rule, right, where he was essentially saying that he wanted to have a rule of not dining with women alone, and many conservatives were praising him because at least he could keep his wife's mind free of worrying about him potentially cheating on her. And what it seems like is a lot of these kind of left-leaning types are saying, well, this undermines the professional opportunities for women, it limits their ability to get mentorship and networking prospects, and perpetuates the stereotypes that men can't control themselves around women. Well, I wouldn't see it that way. I would see it as avoiding cancel culture, right? And some people say it's hypocritical because conservatives support Pence's rule, would likely condemn similar behaviors when it comes to maybe other religions that might be conservative, that are not Christianity. It may point out some double standards. It may talk about broader gender issues, right? Whether can we have this type of dynamic where a man's constantly worried about being accused from a woman, and does it unfairly treat women like they're always going to falsely accuse men of inappropriate actions? Is it kind of undermining women's rights in the workplace? And things like that, right? They might see it as a larger problem when it comes to the consistency of how men are conducting themselves around women in the workplace. So I would say there's many rules that we can actually learn from this, right? And this is why I put together some rules. So we've got the headline here that he doesn't eat alone with women. Some of the key rules that we can take from this so you don't get falsely accused in the workplace is, I wouldn't say you have to always avoid one-to-one interaction with female co-workers, but it's helpful if there are witnesses, right? And if you're at evenings or work social events, just be careful of what you're doing. You don't want to play like you're too close to the woman, making inappropriate physical contact that she didn't invite, drinking alcohol where you might say something inappropriate. And that brings me on to point number 2. You need to protect your careers. Like a UFC fighters protects themselves at all times. You have to protect your careers. So it could be, as a sense, you're not obligated to risk your professional futures to advance women's careers, so especially given the potential for false accusations that could jeopardize your income. While, yeah, we can say it's kind of validated, woman could be viewing male co-workers with suspicion, maybe if he's more senior and she might think he's going to take advantage of her. But as a man, you should always have a healthy, I won't say fear, but healthy caution around false accusations. Just have reasonable caution, have some common sense approach to these type of things. The next thing is respecting your personal life. He has respect for his wife's personal life, the Vice President Pence at the time, keeping healthy boundaries from female co-workers. And I think if you are in a relationship, and you should be cognizant of your time too around work, how much of your work or social evenings, particularly if you're working a corporate job and you're not the vice president of a country, say, you want to spend your evenings with your wife, right, or your girlfriend in your relationship. You don't want to spend so much time around female co-workers in the evening. When does that really benefit your career? Many cases not the case. And then when it comes to being aware of your surroundings, you're thinking clearly after work drink environments, when it comes to team drinks and dinners, and don't let there be any gray areas in communication where you say one thing and then all of a sudden they can interpret as another thing, right? You make a joke and then all of a sudden she takes it seriously and it impacts your career. She goes to HR or the manager and tries to destroy you. Now, another thing would be around Conor McGregor. Now, Conor McGregor was subject to essentially a legal case where he had effectively lost a significant amount of money, right? He actually had to pay out $250,000 to a woman who says he raped her, and she effectively tried to pursue this through a criminal court and that was thrown out, but then she pursued it through a civil court and she won, right? So there's a lot of questions around this, which I'll go through in a second. He was liable for her to pay this amount of money. He also had to cover for her legal costs, so it's 1.5 million. So in total, it's coming close to 1.75 million, paying for her legal fees and for the payout. And he denied the allegations and plans to appeal because he believes he's been falsely accused. Now, I want to go through this case in a bit of detail and give you kind of 9 key points to show you how biased the system is, even against someone who has an excellent legal team. He's probably paying millions of dollars to his lawyers, but this is how you can be accused. So firstly, this woman reached out to him. He didn't reach out to her. They were sending messages back and forth during a party. She sends a photo of herself wearing some clothes and making inappropriate messages that she was sending back and forth with him. And then essentially she's a mother, she's like I don't know her exact age. She looks like she's in her 30s, but she's old enough to know what she's doing as a woman, right? She's sending images and messages with a man, right? She also has a boyfriend, so she was effectively cheating on her boyfriend when she was spending time with Conor McGregor and his friends. So she has self-awareness, but it's convenient. She can play the victim when it's convenient for her. He ended up picking her up, spending 2 hours driving her around, spend a lot of time in the day with her. So also she knows he's married, right? So it's like she's cheating on her boyfriend. She's a mother. She knows he's married. She's like a fully grown adult, so she should know what she's doing, have responsibility and accountability for herself. But in corporate environments, in the legal system, they're not held accountable. So those are 4 facts to focus on. Then her friend called Danielle, who was hanging out with her while she was hanging out with Conor McGregor and their friends, she testified against her own friend and says, everything was fine. She's making essentially a false allegation against Conor McGregor. So even her friend was saying that she's not being honest here, right? She's saying she didn't see anyone upset. She didn't see anything inappropriate. And then the 6th thing was this woman who accused Conor McGregor and won $250K, she was asking her friend to delete the messages because the messages she was sending back and forth with her friend would essentially provide evidence that nothing inappropriate was going on between her and Conor McGregor that she didn't consent to, because it seemed like she was eager to participate in engaging with Conor McGregor. Another point, like I say, the civil suit was rejected. The criminal suit was rejected twice. So that didn't work because there was a lack of evidence. So she pursued a civil lawsuit, which ended up working and getting this money that she got here. And it shows you how even the legal system, the media, the corporations that you might work for, they will always prioritize a woman's emotion over a man's logic, or emotion over logic, period, because they don't want to get sued by the woman. They don't want the media smearing them, so they will always go with that. And also you should understand that based on the fact pattern here, not only did this woman who accused Conor McGregor sleep with Conor McGregor, she also slept with his friend, his male friend, who was also there hanging out with them. And the only thing that saved Conor McGregor was CCTV footage that shows this woman actively pursuing both of them. It really goes to show how, as a man, you can be accused of anything. And even if you have the best lawyers, you could be subject to really reputational damage, as we can see here, right? And if a woman can cry and play the victim, she can essentially leverage anything she wants in any type of professional setting. In this brief clip that we're going to watch from this show, Candace Owens, right? You're probably familiar with Candace Owens, a conservative commentator. She's focusing on this topic too, right? And we're going to have a brief clip that shows how if a female cries, she plays the victim, even if all the evidence is saying nothing inappropriate could have occurred, that she didn't consent to, she still wins, right? Let's look at this acting here.
This is actually a clip of Nikita Hand, just speaking to the fact that often people are just responding to emotion. This is her walking out of the courtroom after she scores the victory against Conor McGregor. Take a listen.
To all the victims of sexual assault, I hope my story is a reminder that no matter how afraid you might be, speak up, you have a voice, and keep on fighting for justice. I know this has impacted not only my life, my daughters, my family and friends tremendously. And it's something that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. But now that justice has been served, I can now try and move on and look forward to the future with my family and friends and daughter.
moving testimony. She cried throughout the trial.
Say emotions override logic, right? And even Candace Owens will catch some flack from women because she's providing narrative that's counter to supporting a woman who's crying her eyes out in a court case, right? She effectively slept with Conor McGregor and his friend and made $250,000, right, in this court case that she profited from. And her friend effectively testified against her. Then you have Conor McGregor's friend who again said nothing inappropriate had occurred. This woman has got so much leverage just by playing the victim, right? So it really makes you think about to what extent this system is valid, right? And if you look at the audit trail that occurred, and this is what I want to point out to you, and this is really one of the key lessons from Conor McGregor's scenario, is having a clear audit trail before and after any interaction with a woman, right? So if a woman's accuses you of anything, you might say, well, before, if in a workplace scenario, in your personal life, you might have messages back and forth that were quite positive with her, and then the morning after or the next day at work, you have messages back and forth on emails that are quite positive with her. So if there was an issue, she didn't flag it. Now, of course, you can always play the victim later, but at least you have some track record that says, well, I'm not sure why a year later or several months later she says something inappropriate happened when she didn't point it out at the time. So I want to focus on some of the lessons that can help you protect yourself here, right? Firstly is maintaining healthy professional boundaries, right? Clear, respectful interactions, especially in workplace social settings. Make sure there's no misunderstandings. Society, corporations, they typically give the other gender a free pass to have zero accountability. If you're in a compromising situation, be cautious of those environments and you can kind of leave them. Avoid substances, alcohol, things like that. You don't want to be misinterpreted or have any false allegations due to something that was a grey area. When it comes to legal risks, civil cases can be proceeded without criminal charges, right? And that's what you see here. The criminal suit didn't work twice, so she pursued civil cases. And typically that won't impact you if you're working a corporate job, unless you're particularly senior, then it could, right? They could pursue this never-ending legal pursuit to effectively get some money out of you. And there could be financial and reputational consequences. So your career will be impacted even by a rumor in the office, even if you've done nothing wrong, even if there's no lawsuit. If a woman says you did something to her, she tells the female co-workers, she tells the female HR Karens, your manager, then all this negative rumors about you circulate through the office. It doesn't matter whether you did it or not, you're going to be treated negatively. Company won't want to promote you because you'll have a negative black cloud, grey cloud hanging over your head. Now, when it comes to documenting all interactions, like I say, communications before and after to ensure if there's a dispute in the future, you've got some track record that wasn't flagged at the time. And then keep a legal contact. And now lots of legal contacts depending on whatever circumstance it is, when it comes to this, employment law, they obviously offer a lot of free advice. Is to really understand the risk and understand their ideology, right? So when it comes to understanding the risks here, what I want you to kind of think through carefully is the accuser has a lot to gain, right? But they have very little to lose. Society has made it completely okay for them to weaponize being a victim, to extract money, resources, and attention. It's validated. They're never-ending whining and whinging, complaining, living in denial of reality. Without accountability, nobody can critique them. It's easy for them to live a lie because it's an unquestioned lie. Society's not really going to question them as long as they provide validation and sympathy. And typically the accusers have been fully indoctrinated that they're right. So anything they've been sold decades of education, that's this us versus them between the genders, and men are bad in one way, shape or form. So always justified in that accusation, right? They can whether or not they're lazy or self-entitled or self-pitying, it's kind of justified that they can steal from men because men have been oppressing them for centuries, apparently, right? And as long as they can see themselves as victims of historic oppression and that they deserve reparations or special treatment, they are not really someone who's going to feel bad about the approach they're taking, right? Discriminating against men, often in corporations, is seen as a normal policy and in companies and broader culture. And these delusions don't only exist at an individual level, they exist at a societal level, and it's throughout the education, media, popular culture, governments, and music and books and things like that. I remember working for many of these investment banks and things like that, without naming a specific one in this case, but they were all, the female co-workers were always reading some sort of feminist book, even if they weren't like someone who watches TV all the time. It'll be the Michelle Obama book, things like that, where it's always pushing this type of narrative that, that is typically anti-male in one way, shape or form. And a good example of this is the Women's March in 2017, which was the pink hat march where they were marching against men or against Trump. It wasn't even clear what they were doing. And apparently well over 100,000 women attended. And they were marching on Washington, complaining about women's rights, racial equality, things like that, and rainbow flag rights, things like that, other progressive causes that apparently Trump was against, even though he really didn't do anything that negatively impacted them. It sparked a wave of activism throughout America. There were different protesters, campaigns, ongoing conversations about justice, inclusion, intersectionality, things like that. And then the wage gap is quite interesting. The wage gap has been debunked several times, right? But apparently everyone has to pretend like it still exists. Women typically, for example, study liberal arts degrees or degrees without high in-demand skills, gender studies degrees, things like that. They don't necessarily pay well. That's one reason why there's a wage gap. Another reason is that women, in several cases, might opt for easier, less senior roles, or may opt for not progressing their career because they want to have kids and have less stress, and in that case that pays less. There's also a difference in effort, drive and motivation and ambition to have that social status to reach those senior roles which men typically go for. Men typically major in tech and engineering degrees at a much higher rate than women, which also results in jobs that pay well and exacerbates the so-called wage gap, and women aren't really oppressed in this type of scenario. And then a fourth point here is around a man's world, right? A woman's workplace, which is a phrase I came up with, right? So they say we live in a man's world, but in many ways a woman's workplace and the corporate talking points are quite pro-woman. Female empowerment, strong, brave, courageous feminists, that they deserve to be praised, protected, shielded from reality and responsibility. There's an element of dictatorship in these type of narratives that you're not allowed to question. Whereas when you can compare that to how men are treated, toxic masculinity, male privilege, man-spreading, internalized misogyny, patriarchal society's bad, things like that. Even when you think about boys at school with the ADHD medication or attention deficit disorder diagnoses to domesticate and basically poison young boys with medication to stop them from being active. And then also you got the high divorce rates and alimony and child custody and support and things like that, which often, again, quite normalized within mainstream society and corporations as something that's normal, and it doesn't matter if men get the short end of the stick there. And then when it comes to kind of getting what they want, they typically do get what they want, right? When it comes to cancelling a male employee for having the wrong opinion because of a feeling or one word, he made me feel uncomfortable, toxic, problematic, right-wing, far-right, conspiracy theorist, even Republican. These things can get you cancelled in a corporate environment, right? And they can seemingly complain about anything without any legitimacy or any facts backing that, just their feelings, right? You can see after Harvey Weinstein, who obviously did some things wrong based on information out there, but there was a 50% rise in harassment complaints in America to the Employment Commission in 2016 and 2017, right? And this really makes you think about, okay, cool. So if there's a news article or many news articles complaining about men, then other women feel justified about complaining about that. And to what extent is that genuine or not? It looks like Harvey Weinstein did things inappropriate, but to what extent other people did really does raise questions. Now, Joel Kaplan attended a particular legal case of Brett Kavanaugh. Now, this is interesting. Brett Kavanaugh was running for Supreme Court, right? To be quite a senior legal figure within the government. And this is quite a funny image. You can see all these women staring at him quite angrily, right? But essentially, what happened was a Facebook employee called Joel Kaplan, who was a friend of him, a personal friend, decided to attend this to support his friend. Now, he's a Facebook employee, quite senior, right? He was the vice president of global public policy, right? And he faced criticism for attending this to support his friend because his friend, Brett Kavanaugh, was getting falsely accused of doing something inappropriate to a woman 35 years ago, right? So he's running for Supreme Court. All of a sudden, a woman from 35 years ago pops up and wants to heavily criticize him. And the way I see it, reading between the lines, it looks like some very wealthy donors offered her some money to put up these type of criticisms of him and effectively really slander his name before he ran for Supreme Court, because she popped out of nowhere after 35 years. So his friend Joel Kaplan from Facebook. He wasn't attending on behalf of Facebook. It was just his friend. He was in his personal life, in his own time. He's not even free to support his friend from false allegations in his personal time, right? And what ended up happening is hundreds of female Facebook employees started complaining to the company internally, saying he's not allowed to support this person in his free time, he's a bad person. Zuckerberg had a meeting. First he was neutral and said employees can have their own political opinions outside of work, but then I think his wife, not his wife, but another female employee who's quite senior, the Facebook chief operating officer, Sheryl Sandberg, yep, she's also the author of Lean In, one of those feminist career woman books. She started lecturing Joel Kaplan, and being quite critical of him attending, so he had to apologize just to keep his job because his job was at risk. And this is the thing, if you're working in the corporate environment, you will inevitably have one career scare. And what I mean by that is there'll be one joke you make that's inappropriate, and then all of a sudden that impacts your career. A woman gets offended by it, then all of a sudden your career is impacted, and then it could be you could be forced to leave that company, right? So all types of unexpected difficulties that could occur, even something where you're just attending a court case to support your friend, right? Now the lesson here is to kind of avoid publicly aligning with polarizing figures. And I know that's easier said than done, because sometimes that is a friend, right? Sometimes you do support Trump and then all of a sudden someone else finds out and they try to destroy your career. Even when it comes to outside work, being careful what you put on social media, because your personal impacts can impact your professional roles, right? Your relationships within the workplace. And the key thing is, even if you, for example, support Trump and that information becomes public, then it can prevent you getting promoted. You know, senior co-workers, they might have, and I've seen this at major investment banks, they have general political views that they all agree with. For example, Brexit is bad, Trump is bad, general, anti-male type of narratives. So if you don't kind of agree with that, or it becomes apparent that you have opposing views, even though if it's nothing to do with the work you do day to day, you're going to have to deal with some element of negativity from that, or that really preventing you from getting promoted. Now, next up we have Larry Summer. So Larry Summer was at a private conference and he said that men outperform women in science and math due to biological differences. Now, things that would be perfectly normal to be said many decades in the past, he's not allowed to say it. And then he was saying that there was not a lot of societal discrimination against women pursuing these type of careers, right, and this type of educational path. He was talking about how women have different childcare and career choices, and suggests that some women prioritize childcare over working long hours, and that's why they're less prominent in more senior science roles. And same thing when it comes to men and women thinking differently. He mentioned his daughter playing with different toys, maybe childcare kind of babies versus boys who would probably play with trucks and more technical type of toys. So it's just difference of interest, but he essentially got cancelled with that, and it did impact him, right? In the case of Larry Summer, what ended up happening was that there was a backlash from female academics saying that he shouldn't be representing Harvard, where he was working at the time, and saying that this was stereotypical type of misogyny, that he shouldn't be allowed to get away with that. And then to a certain extent, there was less women going to Harvard because they thought he was quite anti-female. So these type of things can really impact you, and in the end he got voted out by the faculty to kind of end his career, and they essentially got rid of him because he had different opinions on genders, right? So this is how it shows how, even expressing an opinion that was perfectly normal several decades ago, you can't really do that because it will have career-ending consequences, right? Even logical facts that will get you cancelled. Even if you're in a senior role, this guy was quite senior at Harvard, but it did impact him. Next up, we have Gian Gomoshi. You might recognize his name. He was kind of popular and famous in Canada. He would interview many music artists. I've seen some of his music artist interviews on YouTube before. And he was accused of SA and SH, which is like harassment or abuse of women. And essentially, he was accused of doing things that wouldn't consider physical attacks on women, but like things like emotional abuse, gaslighting, psychological games, undermining their intelligence, their security and sense of self, and things like that. Things that were a bit more vague, right? And it's like even then he was getting accused of things. And then in the end there were other 3 female accusing him, so he had 4 in total accusations. But this trial was debunked and all these accusations were dismissed by the judge, even after 4 accusations, because they said there wasn't a real element of truth or accountability. These stories weren't adding up. And then also when you add to that, they mentioned that there is this type of false accusation culture, right? That if you just make a woman feel uncomfortable, she can accuse you of this. And the kind of key lesson here is, maintaining your strict professionalism, having clear boundaries and clear communication so nothing's misinterpreted. And the impression I get reading between the lines of this case is that he was joking around with women, being a bit flirtatious, but you might think it's a joke in a moment, but they might think it's inappropriate in a moment or later and then accuse you. And then all of a sudden it destroyed your reputation and it really destroyed his career, right? There's always a risk of misinterpretation or allegations, even unfounded claims that can damage your reputation and career trajectory. See, things like harmless flirting is now a massive risk, right? A joke today is a risk tomorrow, and that's a key learning lesson from this. And the next thing I want you to learn is understand their motivations, right? You need to take proactive, preventative steps to protect your career, reputation, and freedom, and recognize, emotional motives like attention or revenge can drive some of these false narratives, right? If they can benefit from this victim narrative, they will, right? And if you think about what do they want to kind of protect, right? When it comes to female employees, they might want to protect their reputation, they might want to advance a political agenda because they see men as the oppressor that they need to get revenge on. Maybe it could be to attract a man, to get one man jealous about attention they're getting from another man. They might create this type of weird triangle relationship dynamic. Maybe simply to get attention, validation, or sympathy. There might be an emotional motivation there. And you should just avoid generally putting your career, life, or reputation or freedom at risk. Understand the culture you're in, stop so you don't get labeled as an oppressor for having a different opinion, even when you're really the one at risk of being falsely accused. Now, I want to go through some of the top 7 motivations against men, right? And effectively, you want to make sure you have a bulletproof vest against these ideologies, right? And then you firstly have a genuine girl boss who will essentially be the result of indoctrination, parenting, and schooling. Then you have political power moves, for example, the SJWs, social justice warriors, Brett Kavanaugh, who I mentioned earlier, being accused when he was running for the Supreme Court after 35 years from a woman from 35 years ago. And then he also have cases where you have revenge-driven maniacs. These are people who might have underlying mental health issues, bipolar type of people, that there's a phrase, hell hath no fury, like a woman scorned. So you have to try there where they try to find proof to accuse you where there is none. Then you have people who are simply attention seekers, right? They like drama, crisis, gossip, popularity, getting sympathy. They might be self-centered, so they might be driven by that. Other people who just hate you, they just read Washington Post or Huffington Post and they see these type of narratives against men and they see an opportunity to incorporate that type of narrative in their day-to-day life in the sense of drama and things like that, or liberal education that kind of led them down this path. And there's people who just want to easily exploit the system. They might not be politically motivated. They're just like, okay, I can essentially get favorable treatment in laws, hiring, education, income transfers, government programs, financial aid, hiring preferences, bogus lawsuits, all these type of things can benefit them. And they might think like, oh, you're just an easy mark, someone they can easily exploit, which brings us on to point number 7. Easy money, right? If you're just too careless as a man, you might be seen as a lazy, easy victim. A woman could put her morality aside and just take the resources of a man through a simple accusation, or the resources of a corporation through suing them, and then it improves their survival chances. And you've got to understand, in any society, there's always people who are going to make a quick buck or try to make a quick buck through accusations or anything like this, right? So those are things to look out for. Sometimes simply being lazy and trying to make a quick buck does make some woman incredibly rich. Even if they're sleeping around with Conor McGregor and their friends even say that they were making up false accusations, they still get away with it, right? Now, I hope when you put together all these cases, Conor McGregor, Joel Kaplan, Brett Kavanaugh, we also went through the first case, which was Vice President Mike Pence. There's lots of interesting instances where the modern workplace effectively is attacking men, even these kind of relatively senior men who have a lot of legal defense, they have a lot of public support. Typically for a vice president, you're going to have public support, but this is how you can protect yourself, by being aware of what the general narratives are, because typically men, they don't have, I would just say fairly, generally speaking, men don't have as much social acumen as women in terms of understanding the subtle social dynamics. So if you're picking up on some of these narratives in your workplace, some of these different little comments, different aspects where you think, oh, is someone trying to set me up for saying, oh, well, he said this and that's inappropriate, then you can kind of reframe and take a few steps back so you don't get accused. Now, I hope you found that helpful. I did kind of speed run how the modern workplace attacks man and how you can prepare ahead. I've worked in the finance industry for over a decade at Goldman and Morgan Stanley. I help many of my clients. Link in description, career advice to help you navigate your way through this tricky scenario. So I hope you found that helpful. Like I say, let me know in the comments how you deal with some of these tricky workplace environments. And there are 2 recommended videos on your screen right now. I'll see you next time.